He was only 16 with dreams higher than the clouds. Marcus Ellis knew every aircraft engine by sound. His walls weren't covered in TikTok stars or rappers, they were filled with flight charts and Boeing blueprints. All he ever wanted was to be a pilot, and today, his dream was coming true. Until it wasn't. Sitting quietly in the airport's pilot lounge, waiting for his guide to return, Marcus was doing nothing more than watching a documentary about jet engines when a veteran airline captain stormed in. One look at Marcus's face, and she called security. Because in her eyes, a young black kid in that room could only mean trouble. What she didn't know, what no one in that room realized, was that Marcus wasn't just another student. And his mother? She wasn't just some lady picking him up. She was the CEO of the entire airline, and she was on her way. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, this was about to become a reckoning. Marcus Ellis had always stood out not because he wanted attention, but because his passion for aviation burned brighter than anything else. At 16, he could identify any commercial aircraft by the sound of its engines. While other teens were obsessed with social media and video games, Marcus spent his time studying air traffic control patterns and simulating takeoffs in his bedroom. So when he was selected for SkyNova Airlines' elite career shadow program, he felt like he was finally taking his first real step toward the skies. But what started as a dream day quickly spiraled into something much darker. While waiting in the airport's pilot lounge with permission, Marcus found himself the target of a seasoned airline captain who saw not a gifted student, but a threat. Captain Dana Rourke didn't ask questions. She didn't check his badge. One look was enough. In her eyes, a young black teenager sitting alone in a professional space could only mean one thing: trouble. She called security, accused him of forging documents, dismissed his quiet explanations. The humiliation was public, sharp, and deeply unjust. Surrounded by strangers, under suspicion for simply being present, Marcus sat paralyzed, his dream dissolving into fear. Would they arrest him? Would this moment define his future? What no one in that lounge realized was that Marcus wasn't just another face in the crowd, and his mother wasn't just another parent. Danielle Ellis was the CEO of SkyNova Airlines, and the moment she heard her son's trembling voice on the phone, the countdown to a reckoning began. This wasn't just about one misunderstanding. It was about the everyday prejudice that young people of color face even in spaces they've earned the right to occupy. And it was about to be answered not with rage, but with power, truth, and the kind of justice that doesn't knock quietly. Marcus never imagined silence could feel so loud after Miss Jenkins, his HR tour guide, was called away for an urgent matter. She told him to wait in the pilot lounge, a space reserved for off-duty flight crews. "There's a great documentary playing," she said with a warm smile. "You'll love it." And she was right. Marcus sat quietly in the corner, eyes locked on the screen, absorbing every detail about the evolution of commercial aircraft. For him, it wasn't just entertainment, it was study, passion, purpose. He barely noticed the room emptying as pilots came and went, prepping for their routes. He was lost in a world of thrust ratios and jet engine mechanics until the energy in the room shifted. The door opened sharply. In stepped Captain Dana Rourke. Tall, crisp uniform, silver wings gleaming, she carried herself like someone who didn't just fly planes, but owned the skies. Her gaze swept the room, then locked onto Marcus. Her brows tightened, her mouth thinned. "Excuse me," she said sharply, walking directly toward him. "How did you get in here?" Marcus blinked, confused. I'm part of the SkyNova Career Shadow Program. Ms. Jenkins said I could wait here." "I don't care what she said," Rourke snapped, already reaching for her radio. "This area is for authorized personnel only, not visitors." Marcus sat up straighter, holding out his lanyard. "My badge, see? It's official. She gave it to me herself." Before he could finish, she snatched it from his neck, breaking the plastic clip. The sound echoed like a slap in the quiet room. Marcus froze. Rourke held the badge up to the light, scrutinizing it like it was stolen property. "This can't be real," she muttered. "Or if it is, it doesn't belong to you." That sentence, casual, loaded, hung in the air like smoke. In that moment, Marcus felt the room shrink. It didn't matter how many flight manuals he'd read. It didn't matter how badly he wanted to fly. To her, he didn't belong here. She didn't ask, she assumed. She didn't verify, she accused. And Marcus? He was just trying to breathe, to hold on to the one thing that kept him grounded, his dream. What he didn't know was that the winds of justice were already shifting, and help was closer than anyone expected. Marcus's pulse quickened as Captain Rourke clicked her radio. "Security to the pilot lounge. I have an unauthorized individual. Possibly a breach." The words cut sharper than the cold edge in her voice. Around him, other pilots began to turn their heads, murmur quietly, some frowning, others simply curious. But no one stepped forward. No one asked what was happening. Marcus stood up slowly, hands visible, heart pounding against his ribs like it wanted to escape. "Please, ma'am, you can call Ms. Jenkins. She told me to wait here. I'm part of the program." "Stop talking," she barked. "You've said enough." He swallowed hard, confusion mixing with humiliation. He could feel every eye on him, every judgment forming in silence. His skin, his presence was enough to trigger suspicion. He hadn't moved, hadn't touched a thing, but in Captain Rourke's mind, he was already guilty. Within minutes, 2 uniformed airport security officers entered the lounge, one older, one younger, both with cold professionalism in their eyes. "Name?" the lead officer asked, pulling out a small notepad. Before Marcus could answer, Captain Rourke stepped in. "I found him sitting here alone. Claims he's part of some program, but this badge looks questionable, and he got defensive when I asked questions." Marcus's mouth fell open. Defensive? She never let him speak more than 2 sentences. The younger officer eyed him. "Son, how'd you get past security? Who gave you this?" Marcus looked from one face to another. "Ms. Carla Jenkins, from HR. I have her number. Please just let me call her. I'm not trespassing." But his voice was getting smaller, swallowed by doubt and fear. The badge, his proof, was still in Rourke's hand. His phone trembled in his pocket. All around him, strangers stood frozen, watching this unfold like a scene in a movie. Was this really happening? All he'd done was watch TV in the lounge. Now he was being interrogated like a suspect. Words swirled through his mind. Trespasser, breach, fraudulent. He couldn't breathe. "I just want to call my mom," he whispered. "Please." The senior officer hesitated. "You've got 1 minute," he said. As Marcus reached for his phone, tears stung the corners of his eyes. Not because he was weak, but because the dream he'd worked so hard for was crumbling in the space of a single misunderstanding. What they didn't know was that Marcus's mom wasn't just anyone, and she was already on her way. Marcus gripped his phone with trembling fingers, trying to steady his voice as the screen rang. Around him, the lounge had turned into a silent courtroom, where he was the defendant and no one came to his defense. Security officers hovered nearby, watchful, skeptical. Captain Rourke stood tall, arms crossed, already convinced of his guilt. The call connected. "Mom?" his voice cracked. I need you to come to Terminal B, now, please." A pause. Then came Danielle's voice, calm, focused. "Marcus, what's wrong?" They think I don't belong here. They said my badge is fake. They're calling it a breach, but I didn't do anything wrong. I was just watching a documentary like Ms. Jenkins told me, I swear." Danielle didn't say much more. She didn't need to. Her tone sharpened. "I'm on my way," she said. "Stay calm. Don't argue. I'll handle this." When the call ended, Marcus lowered the phone and stared at the floor, jaw clenched. He tried to blink back tears. He didn't want to cry, not in front of them, not in front of her. But inside, he felt 14 kinds of cracked. Captain Rourke seized the silence to grandstand. "This is why we need tighter protocols," she said loudly, addressing the gathering crowd of pilots and staff. "You never know who's sneaking into sensitive areas, taking pictures, trying to what? Go viral on social media?" She waved Marcus's badge like a piece of incriminating evidence. "His so-called mother is probably a cleaner or something. Don't worry, once I'm done, she won't be working here anymore, and neither will he." Marcus felt that like a slap to the soul. And still, no one said a word. Behind the glass walls of the lounge, airport life carried on, passengers dragging carry-ons, flight announcements echoing overhead. But inside, time had frozen, until something changed, a subtle shift in the air. One of the security guards tilted his head, listening to his earpiece. The other straightened his posture. A voice crackled through their radios. "VIP approaching. Clear the corridor." The tension rippled like lightning. Captain Rourke frowned, momentarily distracted. "What's going on?" No one answered her, because down the hall a small fleet of black-suited personnel had just entered the terminal, discreet earpieces, tailored jackets, quiet urgency in every step. And at the center of that formation walked a woman in heels, a charcoal suit, and a quiet fire in her eyes. Danielle Ellis had arrived, and she wasn't just a mother anymore. The lounge doors slid open with a soft hiss, but the shift in atmosphere was anything but quiet. Every head turned as Danielle Ellis stepped into the room. Her presence didn't need to announce itself, it demanded attention. Her charcoal suit was perfectly tailored, her stride purposeful, and the small pin on her lapel, a polished silver wing encircled by the SkyNova crest, sparkled under the overhead lights. Captain Rourke was mid-sentence, still speaking to the officers about Marcus like he wasn't even there. "We can't take chances. This could be a serious breach. His mother? She probably doesn't even speak English." Captain Rourke. The voice was soft, but it cut like a jet slicing through cloud cover. Rourke turned, and the color drained from her face. Danielle stood with her arms at her sides, one hand still clutching her phone, the other resting calmly near her hip. Behind her stood 3 SkyNova executives, an HR director, and 2 members of her private security team. Everyone else in the room seemed to realize what was happening, except Rourke, at first. "Ma'am," she stammered, quickly shifting her posture. I was just handling a potential protocol violation. This young man was in a restricted area and—" "That young man," Danielle interrupted, her voice calm but glacier cold, "is my son." Silence, the kind that makes air feel heavy. Marcus felt the grip of fear loosen slightly as his mother stepped between him and the officers, placing a firm hand on his back. Her eyes never left Rourke's. "You accused him of forging a badge," Danielle continued. "You tore it from his neck. You called him a threat, a trespasser. You never even asked who he was." Rourke's lips parted. Nothing came out. Danielle reached into her blazer and retrieved a copy of Marcus's program itinerary, already pulled from company records during her walk to the lounge. "He's a registered participant in SkyNova's shadow program, authorized by HR, wearing a valid badge, assigned to this terminal. So let me ask you, Captain," her voice dropped half an octave, "exactly what made you think he didn't belong?" Rourke looked around, suddenly aware of all the eyes, coworkers, subordinates, security watching not Marcus, but her. The power dynamic had shifted, and there was no flight plan that could guide her out of this. Captain Rourke stood frozen, caught between her collapsing assumptions and the undeniable truth standing in front of her. The badge she had mocked, the boy she had accused, the woman she had dismissed without a second thought. Now that woman wasn't just a protective mother. She was the CEO of SkyNova Airlines. "Ms. Ellis," Rourke said, her voice cracking as she attempted to recover her composure. "I had no idea. If I'd known he was your son." Danielle's eyes narrowed. "That's exactly the problem, Captain. You shouldn't need to know who someone's parent is to treat them with basic respect." The room fell into a reverent hush. She turned to the 2 security officers. "Have you reviewed his credentials?" The senior officer nodded slowly, clearly unnerved. "Yes, ma'am. They check out. Everything's legitimate." Danielle exhaled, then glanced at Marcus. His shoulders were still tense, but his eyes now shimmered with relief. She turned back to Rourke, her voice now calm and razor-precise. "In the last 20 minutes, I've reviewed security footage, cross-checked our employee conduct policy, and pulled your personnel file," she said. "This isn't the first time you've escalated interactions with young people of color, but it will be the last." Rourke's face turned ashen. "I'm placing you on immediate suspension pending internal review," Danielle continued. "Effective now, 6 months without pay. Captain Amira Johnson will take over your flight routes, starting today." Rourke's jaw clenched. 20 years of service. You're ending it like this? "No," Danielle replied smoothly. "You ended it when you chose prejudice over procedure," she motioned to one of the HR reps. "Escort Captain Rourke to HR for processing. Her credentials are to be deactivated immediately." As Rourke was led out head down, steps slow, the silence was deafening. Every person in that room had watched the humiliation she inflicted. Now, they were witnessing something far more rare, public accountability. Danielle turned back to Marcus. Her professional armor melted away as she reached for his hand. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Marcus hesitated. "I think so." "You were incredibly brave," she whispered. And then, with the weight of the past hour finally lifting from his shoulders, Marcus took a deep breath, his first free one in what felt like forever. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was standing tall. The pilot lounge slowly returned to its regular rhythm. People moved, but something had changed. The energy in the room no longer revolved around judgment or fear. It pulsed with quiet reflection and something else entirely. Respect. Marcus sat beside his mother, her hand still gently wrapped around his, when a woman in uniform approached. Tall, confident, composed. Her four captain stripes stood in sharp contrast to the scene they had just witnessed. But it was the warmth in her eyes that struck Marcus most. "Ms. Ellis," she said with a nod of quiet deference. "Captain Amira Johnson. I'll be handling the Chicago flight in Captain Rourke's place." Danielle stood to shake her hand, but Amira's gaze shifted toward Marcus. "And you," she added with a smile, "must be the young man everyone's been whispering about." Marcus straightened instinctively. "Yes, ma'am," she smiled even wider. "I heard you're passionate about aviation. Think you've got a few minutes to see what a real flight deck looks like up close?" His eyes widened. "You mean the actual cockpit? Unless you've got something more exciting planned today," she teased. Danielle nodded, giving her silent blessing. "Go ahead," she said gently. "I'll meet you at gate 12 in 30. As they walked together down the corridor, Amira began asking Marcus questions, not small talk, but real ones, about turbine compression, emergency landing protocols, weather routing software. And he had answers, smart ones. Within minutes, the weight of what had just happened began to fade, not vanish, but soften, replaced by the thrill of standing beside someone who saw his passion, not his skin. Someone who saw a future pilot, not a security threat. Inside the cockpit of the Boeing 787, Amira stepped aside and let Marcus settle into the right-hand seat. His hands hovered over the controls, reverent. "You know," she said, "when I started flying, there weren't a lot of people who looked like me in this seat either. But that didn't stop me, and it won't stop you." Marcus looked up at her, his voice steadier now. "Thank you for seeing me." She nodded. "It's not just about seeing you, Marcus. It's about making sure the world does." And in that moment, as he looked out over the runway from the captain's seat, Marcus didn't just feel like a student. He felt like a pilot in training. 1 month later, the pilot lounge at SkyNova's Terminal B looked very different. Gone were the sterile white walls and lonely technical manuals that once defined the space. In their place, vibrant framed portraits of aviation pioneers, Black, Latino, Indigenous, Asian, and female pilots lined the room, honoring those who broke barriers and soared anyway. A new banner stretched proudly across the entrance. "Flight forward, building tomorrow's skies today." At the center of it all stood Marcus Ellis. He wore the same visitor badge from that fateful day, now framed in a small glass display case beside him. Not as a symbol of shame, but as proof of what could happen when systems were challenged and change was demanded. "Flying isn't just about sitting in the cockpit," Marcus told the small group of high school students gathered in the lounge. "It's about understanding communication, pressure systems, leadership, and trust. It's about knowing that you belong in spaces people may not expect you to enter." His voice no longer trembled. These weren't just words he'd memorized. They were truths forged in the fire of experience, truths he now shared with teens who, like him, carried dreams often doubted by others. Standing near the back of the room was Captain Amira Johnson, arms crossed, a quiet smile on her face. She'd taken a leading role in the Flight Forward mentorship initiative, dividing her time between international routes and guiding the next generation of pilots. Danielle Ellis, ever composed, stood just outside the glass wall of the lounge, observing the scene with the eyes of both a mother and a visionary leader. She had transformed a personal trauma into institutional progress. Flight Forward wasn't just a company program, it was a promise that no child's dream should be derailed by bias, that every student with passion and grit would have a place to grow. As Marcus answered questions, some about flying, others about the incident, he never sugarcoated what had happened. But he also didn't let it define him. Instead, he used it as fuel. Not just to reclaim his space, but to make space for others. Later that day, a new mural was unveiled. A portrait of Marcus in the cockpit beside Captain Johnson, the skyline stretching behind them. Above it, in bold silver script, "The sky has room for all of us." The sun dipped low outside the glass-paneled office as planes lifted into the sky one after another, their engines humming like lullabies for dreamers. Inside, Marcus and Danielle sat in 2 lounge chairs by the window, away from her formal CEO desk, away from the spotlight, just mother and son again. He stared out at the runway, silent for a long moment before speaking. "Today went really well," he said, voice quiet but steady. Danielle smiled. "I heard. Captain Johnson said the students were hanging on to every word." Marcus nodded, then glanced down at his hands. "But I keep thinking, what if you weren't who you are?" Danielle looked over, eyes softening. What if you were just someone's mom, he continued, without the title, without the pin? What if I'd called and no one listened? What if I got arrested that day? Would colleges have still accepted me? Would I still be here helping kids, giving tours? The questions hung heavy in the air. Danielle reached for his hand. That's exactly why I started Flight Forward, she said gently. Because not every kid has a mom in a boardroom, but every kid deserves to be believed. Marcus searched her face, finding no fear there, only fire. When I trained as a pilot 25 years ago, Danielle began, I was usually the only woman in the room and almost always the only black woman. I had an instructor who made it his mission to push me out. Said I might pass the tests, but I'd never fit into the culture. I stayed up nights studying twice as hard as the guys who mocked me. Her voice didn't shake. It was steel wrapped in memory. I passed. I flew. I climbed. And when I had the power, I made sure no one like him could do that again. Marcus looked at her differently now, not just as his mother, but as someone who had carved a path through storms he hadn't even seen coming. She leaned in closer. Fear shouldn't be the price of dreaming, Marcus. What happened to you wasn't just a moment, it was a mirror. We're going to make sure fewer kids ever have to look into it. Outside, a SkyNova plane lifted off into the darkening sky. Inside, a legacy had already taken flight. 6 months after that unforgettable day in the pilot lounge, Marcus Ellis stood at the edge of a runway not as a visitor this time, but as a rising voice in the future of aviation. He was taller now, more composed, though still just 16. But something about his posture said pilot, not passenger. The shy glances had been replaced by steady eye contact. The hesitation in his voice was gone. He was no longer explaining why he belonged, he was showing it. The occasion? The inaugural SkyNova Flight Forward Youth Summit. Students from across the country had gathered to learn about aviation careers. And this time, Marcus wasn't in the crowd, he was on stage. Standing beside Captain Amira Johnson and a panel of diverse industry leaders, Marcus addressed a room full of young dreamers. I was once where you are now, he began, passionate, prepared, and still questioned. He told them about the pilot lounge, about the badge, about the silence. But he also told them about what came next, his mother's courage, Captain Johnson's mentorship, and the doors that were opened not because he was special, but because the truth finally had a spotlight. You shouldn't have to be the CEO's son to be treated with dignity, Marcus said, and that's why we're here today, because we're changing that. Applause rippled through the room. After the summit, Danielle met him at the gate, this time as a guest, not a witness. She smiled as he pulled on a junior co-pilot blazer stitched with his name. You ready? She asked. Marcus nodded. More than ever. Captain Johnson stood beside the aircraft door, waiting. He's all yours, Captain, Danielle said, her voice filled with pride. As Marcus stepped into the cockpit of the Boeing 787, this time not as a tourist, but as a mentee with a seat beside a seasoned pilot, he felt it. The fear was still there, tucked into the corners of memory, but it no longer held power over him. What replaced it was conviction. The engine hummed, the controls gleamed, the sky waited. From the terminal window, Danielle watched as the aircraft began taxiing. Her son wasn't just boarding a flight. He was stepping into his future with courage, clarity, and the wind finally at his back. Above the clouds, a new voice echoed from the cockpit. This is Marcus Ellis, co-pilot in training. We're clear for takeoff. This story reminds us that dignity should never depend on title, status, or skin color. Marcus Ellis was just a boy chasing his dream, yet one person's bias nearly shattered his future. What saved him wasn't just his mother's power, but her unwavering presence, and the truth she demanded be seen. For older generations, parents, grandparents, mentors, this story is a powerful reminder. Our voices, when used to protect and uplift, can change the trajectory of a young life. It also calls us to examine how we judge others, especially those who look or seem out of place. Everyone deserves the chance to rise, to belong, and to pursue their dreams without fear. Whether we are leading companies, families, or communities, the lesson is the same. Stand up, speak up, and make room. Not just for those who already fit in, but especially for those who've been told wrongly that they don't. Because the true measure of a just society is not how it treats the powerful, but how it treats the powerless. And sometimes, all it takes to change a life is showing up and refusing to stay silent. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, Don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. See you in the next one. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. See you in the next one.